So is everybody in, and Babette is helping us? We started the day doing Psalms, Babette, and here we are ending the day doing the Moxor. So we have everybody in from the waiting room for now? Great. So welcome everybody. So as I said, I'm going to be teaching tonight and next Monday night a two-part session on the Moxor, both introducing everybody to the new Moxor we're using, and I'll be talking in general about the Moxor as well and teaching about some of the liturgy, the prayers. But the focus will be introducing you to the new Moxor that we're going to be using at CBST. Who here has this Machzor Lev Shalem in front of you? Fantastic. Fantastic. So I'm going to be referring to it and using page numbers. And we, as everybody knows, we're encouraging everybody to buy it. You'll have it forever, and we'll be using it this year because when we had to make the decision about going online, the Reconstructionist Press was still shut down because of COVID. And we couldn't get to all of our 3,500 copies of the Reconstructionist Moxor, which was in, and still are, in a warehouse in New Jersey. So we thought the best thing was to find another Moxor that would be meaningful and useful for our community. And I read through a lot of different Moxorim that exist. And of course, the other qualification is that their publishing was still available and open in June so that people could start to buy it. So we had a few criteria. So we chose this one, the Conservative Movement's new Moxor. It's new, it started new as in 10 years old, which in the world of a Jewish prayer book is new. It's not new as in this is the first year they're using it. It's been around for about 10 years, I think, 2010. And it matches certain of the needs of our community. And I'll talk about those needs, but also why we thought it would work for this year. The most important thing really being is that it was available and they had a lot of copies in stock. As some of you have heard, they're now out of stock of this version of it, although they do have the large version still in stock. They have two varieties of the large version. If anybody knows others who want to still buy it, it is a little more expensive, but I still have funds to help anybody who needs it.
You mean large print,
They
right?
have a 3-volume large version, which basically, because to make it large makes it a lot heavier. So they have a 3-volume version, and they have something called the pulpit version, which I also have a copy of, which is a large version, but it's 1 volume, so it's quite heavy. But for instance, I'll use it because it's easier to read looking down from a distance. Those are still available. And CBST has also purchased the E version of the Moxor, which we'll use on the high holidays also to create a PDF. And sometimes we'll put some of the text on screen. But tonight we're going to talk about a little bit about this Moxor and why we use it and how to use it well. The first thing is to know the basic layout of the Moxor. Let's open it up to explore that, to understand the basic layout. First of all, why is a Moxor called a Moxor? For those who don't even know that, let's start to the very basic. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. And at a certain point, I'll pause and look at what the questions are. But I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes. Then we'll stop and I'll look at what questions. Then I'll go on and then I'll stop and look at questions. So first of all, look at page 2 of the Moxor. Open it up to page 2. The first thing to notice is that both sides of the book, first of all, we open from the Hebrew side. So if you're not used to that, that might be a little confusing. Find page 2. If you'll notice, both sides of the page are labeled page 2. So the Hebrew side, which is on the right side of the book, and the English side, which is the left side of the book, both are labeled page 2. That is both useful and creative and might be confusing sometimes. So we will be aware of that. But what they're trying to make the point is the Hebrew and the English are doing the same thing. But sometimes I'll say English page 2, and that means the English side of page 2. And sometimes we'll be on page 2 and be reading the Hebrew. So does everybody get that? Is that clear to everybody? So page 2 is referring to the Hebrew right side of the page and the English side of the page, which is translating the Hebrew side of the page. There are 4 columns to every page. So in other words, page 2 means both sides. So when I say there are 4 columns to every page, because they're using the number 2, I'm considering that one page. Okay, so let's look at the 4 columns. And every page in this Moxor is treated the same way. There are 4 columns. To the far right, because in Hebrew, we're starting on the right side, the column starts on the top of the page. It says Hakdama Latfilah in Hebrew. And then there's an English column. And on the top of that column, you see it says Rosh Hashanah. Everybody see that? If anybody doesn't see it, let me know so we can make sure you're oriented. So the far right column for every page, the commentary will be explaining things. These are not to be read out loud. They're not poems. They're not trying to be poetic. They're explanations. One can say sometimes they're explaining basic things about the holiday. Sometimes it's explaining basic things about the prayers on that page, but they're very much explanations, trying to make sure everybody understands things. So on this page, for instance, it explains a little bit about Rosh Hashanah, and then on the bottom it explains the quote where the citation is from, and about what the explanations. The next column, so imagine that is column 1. Moving from right to left. The next column is the Hebrew. The next column moving to the next page, but of course it's on the same page too, is the translation of the Hebrew. And then the 4th column moving all the way to the left are poems, things meant to be perhaps considered poetic interpretations or interpretive readings of the more literal page, middle of the page. So, and you'll also notice on the top of page 2, it says preparatory prayers in English. Everybody see that? That's the English translation of Hakdama Latfilah, which means introductory prayers or beginning prayers. So if you look below the English where it says preparatory prayers, you'll see a funny little symbol. Like it looks like a paragraph symbol with a little chick. Everybody see that little in red? That's this book's symbol to mean a moment when we might read something out loud. It's telling the service leader this might be something to read out loud, and it's telling the congregant that this is something that might have something poetic, something interpretive, a poem that might be an interesting read. So that you might notice that this is a poem that's in the Reconstructionist Moxor that we sometimes have read at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. So in other words, the far left is a poetic interpretation, a reading that would be a lovely thing to read at the moment instead of whatever is in column 3. So I'm going to stop for a moment so everybody understands columns 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is there anybody who doesn't? Raise your hand, either electronically or literally, so I can see it, to see if I should make that any more clear. Because that's really an important layout understanding of this Moxor, and it'll make a difference as we go through the Moxor. So I don't see any hands raised, I think, so everybody gets that, right? Good. So there are different symbols to understand. But looking at the bottom of the page of this Moxor, on the Hebrew page 2, it says in Hebrew, Aravit LeRosh Hashanah, the evening service of Rosh Hashanah, and it says in the red where you are in the evening of service. So every page should have at the bottom of the page for this Moxor a little bit of a roadmap. So the roadmap's on the bottom. It says in the black, the big place we are, and in the red, more specific. And in the English on page 2, it says Rosh Hashanah evening service, the big part of where we are. And in the red, it says preparatory prayers, where we are in the evening service itself. Okay? So that's a very important. The other thing about this Moxor to know is that it tried to be gender neutral in its references to God, which is a big step for the conservative movement. So you'll notice it often uses the name of God, Adonai, instead of making a reference. So you'll notice in the English, underneath words of welcome, Shalom, shalom to those who are far off, shalom to those who are near, says Adonai. In the small, large caps, if I got that right as the way to refer to it. So for those of you who are Hebrew readers, if you looked over, did I get it right, Marcia and Susan? Is that what it's called? What's the publishing words for that?
Small caps.
Small caps.
It's initial cap, small caps.
Initial cap, small caps.
Okay.
So the A is
Initial
regular cap. It's an
Oh,
initial
I see that.
cap,
You're right.
small cap. That's all. That's the
Got
only
it.
difference.
So they're trying to make, why do they have it printed like that in English letters? For those of you who are Hebrew readers, look over to the Hebrew side and which name of God is being used? Yud, He, Vav, He, the 4-letter name of God, the big guy letter, and the Psalms class, we talk a lot about that. So for this Moxor, when Yud, He, Vav, He is the Hebrew word for God, they use Adonai with the capital A and then the rest of it in the small caps. So yes. But you'll see when other names of God, you see the next paragraph in English down, mighty God, G-O-D gets used. But when Yud He Vav He is used, instead of any other reference, because we've talked about it, there's no way to really translate it. They don't want to say Lord, which was the old way of translating Yud He Vav He. They want to stay away from the word Lord, but they want to indicate this was Yud He Vav He. They will use Adonai with the caps. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions or comments that I need to respond to. Let me look at it. Yes, thank you, Harold. So why do we call this Moxor? Moxor is only used for the books we use for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and Siddur is used for the prayer book for Shabbat. Siddur is from the word like for Seder, which means order, and it's the order of the prayers, and that's used for Shabbat. Machzor, which means a cycle, or a chazar means to return. So a Machzor is to return each year. So they come for the once a year holidays. So this is a Machzor for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. A lot smaller than the Reconstructionist, and we'll see why, but that's another reason it's very nice. But everything that we'll use for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is in this one book. Some of you might remember before we started with the Reconstructionist Moxor, which was about 25 or 26 years ago, CBST had done its own service book for all the different services. So we had about 7 different books that we had to change in the course of the 2 days of the high holidays, and it was very difficult. But they were very.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah. Okay.
A real nightmare.
I'm trying.
And we always ran out.
Yes, it was difficult because we had to keep changing. Every Torah service had its own book. Yizkor had its own book. The evening service had its own book. The morning service had its own book. Musaf had its own book. Ne'ilah had its own book. So it was very labor intensive to keep changing the books. So I'm very grateful for this. So let's check. Any other questions or comments for now? Siddur is used for all prayer books that are not for high holidays and not for the other 3 pilgrim festivals. So it's used for, very good question. Is it related to the same root as Zachor? No, it's a different letter. In Zachor, it's a Chaf, and in Moxor, it's a Chet. So it is a different shoresh. Good question.
Raise your hand. Raise hand.
Okay, Marcia?
Just a comment, in our Sidur, we have a Machzor Hashanah, right? Which
Because
is
it's the cycle of the
because
year.
it's the cycle.
Exactly.
So that, and we have a partition, we have a part title page just to indicate that the prayers that are there are for every season, basically.
Exactly. Because
Which is a
Moxor literally means cycle. It means
Mhm.
the cycle of something.
Nice. Yeah.
Excellent. So you'll notice that there are, so like turn to page 3. Let's just look at a few of these. So this has different readings on page 3 as a part of this preparatory thing. You'll see on the column 4, the farthest to the left, they use a lot of Hasidic prayers. One of the editors of the prayer book, the main editor-in-chief of this prayer book, Edward Held, his wife is a very famous Jewish poet, and the prayer book definitely places a high value on wonderful poetry. So throughout this prayer book, you'll find wonderful poetry, both kind of historical poetry or older poetry, as well as some contemporary poetry, and with a lot of interpretive translations of things. So on page 4, this is for when Shabbat happens, which will happen this year. Rosh Hashanah, our evening of Rosh Hashanah on the 18th coincides with Shabbat. So all the Shabbat inserts, so here's, for instance, the Psalm for Shabbat, which we all know so well. And then you'll see on page 4 in the English, the transliteration for the part that they, as the conservative movement, assumed would be sung, the Tzadi Katamar. We, of course, sing a lot more of it than that. So they put in transliteration what they imagine would be communal singing. And then continues to have beautiful readings. So again, on column 1, all the way to the far right, are explanatory comments, things to help you understand something more deeply. And by the way, it's wonderful to sit with the Moxor and read through it. And so the column all the way to the right will explain things and teach you things. And then the column all the way to the left are interpretive, poetic, lovely readings about it. And then let's look to page 5 for, this is where the Kriyat Shema Uvirchatecha, the Shema and its blessings. And so choreographic instructions are found in red. And then you'll notice next to the Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed, or praise Adonai to whom all prayer is directed. You see that funny symbol? I don't know if that symbol has a name in typesetting. Do you see it next to where it says praise Adonai to whom all prayer is directed forever and ever in English? Or Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Va'ed? I want everybody to see that. You see there's a very funny symbol. It kind of looks like a ribbon. Like I think it looks like the ribbon on the, like a AIDS ribbon or the breast cancer ribbon with a little chick on the bottom. Does everybody see what I'm referring to? The conservative movement put that symbol in, I don't know if it has a name, to indicate that's when we bow. It's a choreographic hint, because to tell everybody that's where congregational, not the chazan bowing, but congregational bowing. So it's very helpful, actually. It's very useful. So it's a little bit of a choreographic, mark, indicator. What would you call it? Just a little
Prompt.
hint.
Prompt.
A prompt. That's a good word. It's a visual cue, right? What to do, a prompt, excellent. So far we've learned about the 2 major prompts that this Moxor uses, which are very useful. One prompt, which indicates this would be a good prayer to read out loud, though I don't think we necessarily, but the other, to tell you as a congregant when it's traditional to bow. So that's an example of that. And then I'll show you a couple of other examples of that. Over on the right side in the Hebrew, you'll see a triangle in the Hebrew at Uma'avir Yom. Everybody see that? A textual prompt. Excellent, Randy. But
Rabbi?
yes.
This is Catherine. I don't have my book yet, and I wondered if you think it's appropriate, could you hold up your book if it's something that we really need to see?
Yeah, I probably,
Rabbi, I can take a picture and share a screen if you think that would be helpful.
yeah, if people, yeah, I want people to see it. That'd be great.
Thank you.
I know, thank God for Harold Levine. If I were better at this, I would know how to do all this, but I don't. So it's one of the things on my list for 5781. Harold, I'm going to learn how to do Dropbox. I'm going to learn how to do Google Docs. I'm going to learn how to put things up on the screen. That's what I'm telling everybody, my 5781.
But then you won't need me.
Well, that's never true, Harold. And I have to, yeah, that's mine. On page X1, by the way, which is 11 of the introduction, for those who do have the Moxor, if you look at 11X1 though, what do you say? Roman numeral 11, is that how you'd say it? Roman numeral 11, there's an explanation of what I'm telling you now, if you want to go back and read it more thoroughly. Okay, so well, Harold, does everybody see that? For those who have the book in front of you? That's an explanation of what the symbols are, which are really important for this book and unique to this book, but I think they're actually quite helpful, So going to the triangle, as Harold is doing what he's doing. So you see in Umavir Yom, you look over, does everybody see in the Hebrew? It's on page 5, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom of the Hebrew on the right-hand side. Is everybody there? You see a little triangle?
Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Harold Levine.
Oh, yay. All right, so full screen. So to go over those again, Rabbi, we have the...
By Umavir Yom.
Yep, okay, hold on.
Can you do a little...
I can, Umavir Yom.
It's interesting, yours doesn't look red, mine is red.
Hello?
Okay, so you see that little triangle? That's the indicator to the Chazan when he sings or she sings, ours is a he, sings out loud. It's traditional in Jewish prayer practice for the Chazan to read what we call the Chatima, which is the concluding line of the davening, of the blessing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Let's use this page. This is good for this. So, you see how it says in the English, it says first bracha before the Shema. There are 2 brachot before the Shema. And what defines a bracha in prayer? The bracha begins with the opening, which we call in prayer language a peticha, an opening. It says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim. That is the opening. And traditionally, when you're in an Orthodox or even in our morning minyanim and the davener, the chazan, the shliach tzibor is davening out loud, everybody is davening together, but you never go on beyond the bracha until the chazan is there. So even though it sounds like all it's mumble jumbo, everybody's waiting for the chazan to say the end of the bracha. Counter to how we, in English, we're taught, when you write a paragraph, when you learn formal writing, the first sentence of a paragraph in English is called the theme sentence or the topic sentence or something, where that's the sentence of the paragraph that's supposed to say what the ikar, this is when you learn in junior high school how to write a paragraph. In Hebrew, it's the opposite. The final sentence in a blessing is the ikar, the essence of the blessing. And the final sentence tells you what that whole paragraph was about. So if you look at the bottom, Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim is the final sentence, which says that we bless God who brings the evening light. That's the final sentence. That's what makes it a final bracha. So the chazan must say that part out loud. And the question is for a chazan, when do I start? And usually it's the verse right before that final verse. So that little triangle tells the cantor or the chazan when to start chanting out loud. So you will hear cantor Sam Rosen or a cantor anywhere where that little triangle is, even if the first part was mumbled or said silently, the cantor starts at that triangle to do it out loud. So that's what that symbol means. Over on the left in the English, why is the bracha, the word bracha, spelled the way it is spelled? The conservative movement has made this decision. Marcia and Susan, remember that with Rabbi Ayelet Cohen, we agonized over this also. There is a scientific, what's called scientific transliteration, and then colloquial transliteration. Colloquial transliteration means you transliterate just according to your ear, and it's what's commonly known. Scientific transliteration is a transliteration that the academic, or it's also known as academic transliteration, that you can always, there's distinguishing features done so that you could go back from the transliteration into the Hebrew and get the correct word, letters. So KH is how they've decided to translate, which I think I don't like personally, but they've decided to translate the Chaf to distinguish it from the Chet. So a Chaf is translated with a KH, and the Chet is translated with an H with a dot underneath. So I'll show that to you as we get to it. That's very confusing often for people who aren't familiar with it, which is why I'm telling you about it. Okay, let me stop here for questions or comments. How's everybody doing? Okay, am I going too fast? People okay? Good.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I really want people to be able to feel like you understand what they're doing here in the kind of the publishing decisions or the yeah. All right. Are there any questions or comments, Harold?
You're
Okay.
fine.
I'm okay.
No hands up, no hands up,
Okay.
and I think you're good here.
Okay. So the Shema, this section of the prayers, which is true in Friday nights, it's true in Shabbat, it's true in weekdays, is very nicely laid out here. The Baruch Hu begins the section, but the section is called the Kriyat Shema Uvirchoteha, the Shema and her blessings. So the layout of this seat of this Moxor is very nice. So you see in Hebrew, it's the bolded Baruch Adonai HaBarach Leolam Va'ed indicates the congregation says that, and the congregation bows is indicated by that little ribbon-like mark. Okay, then if we turn to the next page, page 6, and so remember page 6 is both the Hebrew side and the English side. All of the non-liturgical parts are in red. So what do I mean by that? The choreography. Some people here wish to pause for a moment. Some close their eyes. Others place a hand over their eyes. The intention is to concentrate on the oneness of God. So all of that is not really part of the liturgy. It's explanation. And so they put it in italics, I think, right, and red. But if you look up here in, I don't know how to do it, in the Hebrew, again, look for the diamond. We have it. You see in the diamond in the paragraph on the top right, Harold, there's the diamond. So that we know is where the Chazan davens out loud if everybody's been davening to themselves. And we lead up to the last part of the bracha, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. So we know from that topic sentence, that whole paragraph was about the love of God for the people Israel. And then the recitation of the Shema itself. And so you see the Shema is a little bit larger. And then the transliteration that they assume people are doing is in the red. And then on the far left are beautiful poems, one by Marcia Falk and the other by Heschel. I also very much appreciate that they use a lot of women in their poets and in their interpretive readings are written by women. So Marcia Falk, very important feminist liturgist and theologian. Her stuff is very prominent. And so again, looking at the bottom of the page, you can say, where are we? We're in Rosh Hashanah. So that's the holiday, the day. We're in the evening service, and we're in the Shema and its blessings. So the bottom of the page, that footer gives us a location for everything. It's very useful. Turning the page, I'm now going to, over on the upper left, you can see there's a little, that little sign. It says, this is something they're suggesting can be read out loud. I don't think it's, I'll make those decisions, but while you're in the service, for sure, be looking to the left side, the right side, reading through, finding things that are interesting to you to make them meaningful to you. So I'm going to skip a little bit to show some other things that are special. Most of the Rosh Hashanah evening service, honestly, are very similar to our Shabbos evening service. But I want you to know what's special about the Moxor itself. Okay, so now I'm going to do a few other things to show about this. We are going to go to page 11. So the evening service, there is no out loud Amidah or Shmona Esrei or Amidah or whatever you call it. It's all done silently. We do the Amidah out loud for only during the daytime. So for Shachrit and for Musaf and Mincha, those are out loud, but only in the evening service, it's only to ourselves. So that's why it's called the silent Amidah for the evening service. It's never repeated out loud. But one thing that's interesting for this, the conservative movement still has not resolved that the matriarchs should absolutely be used in the Amidah, although I would say most conservative synagogues now do. There are some very powerful holdouts. So you'll see this is a holdover. I wonder if they were to do the Moxor now, whether this would still be included. But there's an option here, only to use the patriarchs, which is the column on the right, or to include the matriarchs, which is the second column there. And likewise, in the English, you could see one column only has the patriarchs and one includes the matriarchs. Of course, at CBST, we add Bilhah and Zilpah to our matriarchs, which we will do, even though this Machzor doesn't include them, when we do the blessings out loud. But this is from the conservative movements, not yet. I don't know, it'd be interesting to know whether if they were to publish this Moxor now, whether this is still true. I think it is.
Well, they do. The Siddur is more recent, and they still do it. It may be because some pages are already typeset, but
there are definitely some conservative synagogues that are probably, and this is to keep the conservative movement family.
Excuse me, Rabbi. Excuse me.
Rabbi, if you're taking questions, Ellen Ratner has her hand up. Oh,
yes, Ellen.
Thank you. I don't read Hebrew, and without the transliteration, I have to say I love the book, but it's very confusing to me. Any thoughts on how to make it easier?
Read the English.
I know, but they're not. It doesn't seem to be as coordinated as it is when it's Hebrew transliteration. What we're used to.
The English on the left side is the English of the Hebrew on the right side. It's absolute. They've definitely laid it out. So if we were davening in Hebrew and I said we're on page 13 and you just read the English, that would on page 13, that's the Hebrew that would be going on. It's definitely a weakness of this Moxor that it doesn't have as much transliteration. And that's part of the reason they can have a Moxor that's a lot smaller than the one that we use. But still the English on the left side is absolutely the English of what the right side is.
Okay, I guess I'll have
Absolutely
to do it.
the same. So if I say we're on page 13 and you read only the English while the Hebrew is being davened through, you would be reading the same thing.
Rabbi, there's a question of Bilhah and Zilpah, who they are.
So in the story of the 12 tribes, they were born from and were considered descendants of the 12 tribes. There were actually 4 women who were the mothers of those 12. right? Rachel and Leah are the two sisters who are the most famous, but they actually had concubines named Bilhah and Zilpah, who also gave birth to numbers of the 12 sons. So when we did our Siddur many years ago, now 2007, we decided to include Bilhah and Zilpah because just like LGBT folks, for whom legal parents aren't necessarily who our parents are, or a legal relationship isn't necessarily mark ancestry, we wanted to honor those women who actually gave birth, but because they didn't have the legal status that Rachel and Leah had, they're usually neglected by our prayers. So we added them because we didn't want to neglect them because they are certainly our mothers as well as Rachel and Leah. But a great question. Anything else?
Well, there's the back and forth. Why did we, just that question again, maybe someone who came in a little later, why we switched with
well, we switched because the Reconstructionist Press was not open, so we couldn't have bought new books from the Reconstructionist Press for their Moxor. And our 3,500 copies of the Moxor are buried deep in a warehouse in New Jersey. And because of COVID, we didn't know how we would be able to distribute them to everybody. How would we mail them out? How would we find a way to figure out who needed one? Would we charge people for it? Did it feel okay to charge people, to rent it? How would we actually logistically do it when our office is closed? So we decided the easiest thing is to find a Moxor that's in print that we could send congregants to buy, so it wouldn't have to go through the CBST office, which wasn't open. And we would do the services will be the same because the prayers are the same, but we will use a different Moxor.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that was my question. Thank you.
And we think this is a beautiful Moxor with a lot of beautiful readings to it. Any other questions?
I think well,
okay. Sorry, more than a question, I know it's a very hard petition, but for those of us that actually really like to say the prayers out loud, but we don't read Hebrew, would there be a chance that the sections that are not transliterated in the book made available to us in some way? I know it's really difficult, Rabbi.
Even in the other Moxor, it does not transliterate everything. There's only the things that are usually sung. Not all the prayers are transliterated.
Thank you.
But we could certainly, yeah.
Rabbi, I'm going to look into the transliteration issue, if it's okay to say that here.
Yeah.
And if there's some ways, even for the major prayers, we could find something else that we can offer as a PDF available to people who, for some of the sections, would like a transliteration. I think I have a few weeks to pull that off.
Well, let's talk about it. So let's, like Psalm 27, Achat Sha'alti is transliterated, which is the same thing as if you look at page 27. I like Psalm 27 is on page 27.
Page 27.
Harold, what are we looking at here? Is this the electronic version?
This is the PDF, yeah.
So this is what is available, right? We will be able to.
Exactly what you can get for $5.95. It's a little it's a beautiful copy. You have to go. The page numbers are funny because you have to go all the way to the end and then come back. I think the software is based on English books, but you can make it bigger. You can make it smaller. You can search for a page. I think you can put it on a tablet if you want.
Yeah, and so here you see Achat Sha'alti is transliterated, and that is usually what we sing out loud. So they have transliterated the things that are sung out loud. And then one thing I like, so if you go to page now 29 and then we'll go to 30, they have a very nice section for Rosh Hashanah at home, for doing the blessings. These are blessings for the children. Candle lighting is on page 30. So and then you see on page 31 is Kiddush.
And we do have a transliteration for what you do at home of the candle lighting, of the blessing of the children, the priestly blessing.
And then you see on page 32 is hand washing, motzi, all those things do have transliteration. And then the blessing for dipping the apple in the honey, although the blessings for a sweet new year, all of that's very nicely done here, I think. And then this is the kiddush for the daytime, the afternoon meal. So they have it's just a nice little section for all the home things that are very available. And then page 33 has the morning session service for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And what's nice is that in the beginning of each of the sections, it then tells you where the different pieces will be found in that section. Is there another question there that I missed, Harold, before I go on?
Hold on, let me see if anyone has their hand up. There's, Devora has her hand up. Devora Stahl?
I happen to have used this Moxor 2 years in a row at another synagogue. And when I just was totally engaged with it. And I found myself drifting off and reading all the commentary. And I learned a lot that I didn't know about the holiday and people of our ancestors reading the commentary. So I went out and bought it immediately after the high holidays. And I've had the copy at home for probably 8 years.
Oh,
and
nice.
I pick it up frequently just to read the columns. And right now I'm in the hospital, so I don't have the book with me, but I appreciate Harold putting it up. And that's all I have to say.
We're praying for you, Devora.
Thank you. I need it. They just found something else, so.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And I think what Devora is saying is really true. I really encourage people who now have this at home to read through it, read the columns on the side. Again, on the far right are explanations, on the far left are kind of creative interpretive readings based on the themes. So, okay, now what I want to do is I want to ask people, what's your favorite prayer of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And let's talk about it a little bit and talk about how this Moxor, what's something that you love?
So if I could just say, for people who haven't done this on Zoom before, on the bottom of your screen, it says participants. And if you go to participants, it will say raise hand, and it makes us much easier because we can only see the first out of 5 screens of people looking at. So Ira has raised his hand.
Ira, tell us what's your favorite prayer and why, or one of, it doesn't, you don't have to, one of your favorite prayers and why, but pick one.
One of mine, we're managing our audio here.
Turn down your gain. What?
Unatana Tokef.
Unatana Tokef. And tell us why. And then let's look at it.
Why? Because I think it has all of the really, the deepest themes of the holiday that speak to me particularly. I mean, I'm sure they speak to many people, but I really resonate with that. And that also, as a member of the chorus, we sing some extraordinary settings of Unatana Tokef. So it's come to be very close to my heart because of that as well.
So let's look at Unatana Tokef. Thank you, Ira. So Unatana Tokef, we'll start, it's on page 143. Yeah, Harold, do you have to go page by page? Is that how it, oh, wow, look at that.
Very nice navigation.
Very nice navigation. Okay, so Unatana Tokef, this is on page 143. It is in the Amidah. So the Amidah is the silent prayer that's in every Jewish service. And the Amidah has a different number of blessings based on the service it's in, which is based on the day it's in. So the Amidah on Shabbat has 7 blessings. The Amidah on weekdays has 19 blessings. And we are now, if you see the way this Moxor is set up, can you go back to 141 for a second, Harold, just so we'll start. So this is the beginning of the Amidah. you'll see it says first bracha. Everybody say, you see where it says first bracha? Bracha means blessing. So the first blessing, and then they have a colon, and then they tell you the theme of the first blessing. The first blessing is always the same. The words might change a little bit, but it's always about our ancestors. That's why we recite about our patriarchs and matriarchs. Okay, let's turn the page. The second blessing of the Amidah, you see where it says second bracha? Bracha means blessing, is about God's saving care. All right, then the third blessing of the Amidah is called God's holiness, or in Hebrew, it's interesting, they don't have the Hebrew word for it, but in Hebrew, it's always called Kedushat Hashem. The third blessing of the Amidah is always Kedushat Hashem, or meaning the holiness of God, or the name is a way of referring to God. So Kedushat Hashem is the third blessing. That changes depending on where, on what holiday it is, what day of the week is. For Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Kedushat Hashem starts with this very powerful prayer called Untitled Chapter, which is what Ira was referring to. And it's called Untitled Chapter because the first two Hebrew words, or the first are Untitled Chapter Kedushat Hayom. We declare the holiness of the day. So how do we declare the holiness of the day in this most holy of seasons? We remind ourselves that we are of the most ephemeral nature, that we are like the grass which just will flutter into the wind. We don't know who will live and who will die. We don't know in this coming year if we will die or live, and we don't know how we would possibly die. And all of this is about to remind us of the power of making every single day count. So in this Siddur, the Machzor, you'll see to the far left, a reading that we often do at CBST before we start the chanting of Untitled Chapter, because we think it's such a beautiful interpretive way to understand what it means, who will live and who will die. When we really begin a new year, it is decided, and when we actually repent, it is determined. Who will be truly alive and who shall merely exist? Who shall be happy and who shall be miserable? Who shall attain fulfillment and who, et cetera, et cetera. You could continue reading it. So the layout of this is very powerful. In the Hebrew, you see the verse that we sing out loud is transliterated in the red. Rosh Hashanah yikatevun. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on the fast of the Day of Atonement it is sealed. Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, uv'yom tzom kippur yichatemun. It is sealed. And then going down in the Hebrew, parallel to the English, who will live and who will die? Who will live a long life and who will come to an untimely end? Who will perish by fire and who by water? Who by sword and who by beast? Who by hunger and who by thirst? I get the chills just reading this. Who will be strangled and who will be stoned? Who will be at peace and who will be troubled? So this is the Untitled Chapter, which continues to the next page, 144. This whole section is Untitled Chapter. And on the top of the page, in bold, Utshuva, Utzvila, Utzdaka. But tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah have the power to transform the harshness of our destiny. So this whole section, which is, as Ira pointed out, such powerful, and the music that's written for this is some of the most profound music we have in our tradition, because this is such a central prayer. Okay, I'm going to stop because I see a lot of people have raised hands.
Okay, hold on. Let's get to the Steve's iPad, Steve.
I'm here. It's Stephen Raphael. I can't figure out how to change my name on my iPad. Sorry. Mine is for the sin which we have sinned.
Okay, so hold off on that. Let's see if there are any more comments about Untitled Chapter before we go to other people's favorite prayers, and we'll look at them in the Moxor.
Julia Porper.
The Avinu Malkeinu really speaks.
Okay, I'm
to me,
gonna hold
especially
off
the
on people
melody.
giving me new prayers. Are there any comments or questions? I'm gonna write these down, the Al Chet and the Avinu Malkeinu. But are there any other comments about or questions about the Unatana Tokef?
Randy, Elizabeth,
Sorry, I wasn't clear about that.
it's okay. Randy, Elizabeth, Linda, and Marcia all have their hands up. Do any of you have a question about the Unatana Tokef rather than your most significant part of the service? If so, you can unmute yourself.
I have this is Liz Cooper. I have a question. Hey, Rabbi. I see that here, I guess because it's conservative, it uses the like Mechaye Meitim instead of the language that's in the Reconstructionists, which I guess called Chai, I guess it is, right? And so I'm just sort of curious about, like, I know we're not affiliated, so what's the kind of approach that you all are thinking is the way we deal with these? I don't know if it comes up in Aleinu as well with similar, differential kind of approach.
So we actually, CBST being the eclectic place we are, like we use the conservative Siddur for Shabbat morning for some of our davening. So we use all different language, but that's a very good question. I'm going to put down, let me just put that down. So I'm 18, so I can explain it more to people. But did you want to say more about that? That's a great question.
No, I was just, philosophical. It just raised the question of, I guess over the years of coming to Friday night services more than Saturday morning, I found myself directionally more towards Reconstructionist Judaism than the conservative Judaism that I was raised with. And so it's sort of interesting to me to renegotiate in my head and in my heart, going away from language that I had gotten used to and had embraced. So
I think it's a great question. Let me explain a little bit the background of the question so that people can understand what you're asking, because it's a fantastic question. In traditional Jewish practice, the language is Mechaye HaMeitim, which get used in some of the blessing, which means talks about the resurrection of the dead. And since Reconstructionists don't believe in the resurrection of the dead literally, they change that language to Mechaye HaKol, to mean give life to everything. Me personally, I don't mind Mechaye Meitim, because I can make that into a metaphor also. So for me personally, I don't, and I think a lot of Reconstructionists are where I am too, but I'm happy with the language change and I'm happy without the language change, because in my head, to give life to the dead, Mechaye HaMeitim doesn't for me necessarily mean literally resurrection. It means how do we give life to the dead? It means about how do we live our lives? How do we give life to those who are no longer alive? It's all about how we live our lives. So for me, I'm okay with that. But what you'll hear us do, sometimes the cantor will do the different forms of it. We'll just use it a little different ways. Aleinu, I have more problems with personally, and we will also change it sometimes when we just say it out loud.
Thank you very much.
We'll just.
I just want to give you a time check that it's 6:55, so we have 5 minutes left.
5 minutes. So are there any other questions about Unatana Tokef?
Okay. I don't believe, well, if Randy, Linda, or Marcia have a question about Unatana Tokef, or Sherry,
or a general question, and maybe we'll save other prayers for next time. Maybe any other general questions. So we don't have time right now to jump into another prayer. So.
All right. So, Linda, do you have a general question? Linda Solomon. Unmute yourself.
No, I'm going to wait till next week because mine is about Yom Kippur. My second favorite.
Marcia, do you have a general question? Marcia Melnick.
No.
Okay. No. All right. Andrew, Sherry Dratfield, do you?
I'll put that in the chat. Oops, sorry.
Yes, I do. It's sort of in the midst. I always love Leonard Cohen's rendition, and I know we have choral constraints, and I wondered if anyone had given thought to how
we are doing it. We are going to do it. I think not for the, so Musaf is there are 3 days of Musaf for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I can't right now remember which day we're doing it, but we are doing it, but not on all three. I can't remember.
Thank you.
This is mind isn't what it was, you know.
It gets greater and greater.
I have it written down. Don't worry. We'll do it, but I can't remember it right now.
Andrew Kaplan.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Bubala.
You mentioned that the editor-in-chief of the book's wife is a poet. What else do you know about the people who created the book? Do you know anything?
Good question. Yes. Ed Feld, who's the rabbi who is a wonderful rabbi, and his, I think he's the editor-in-chief. Am I right? I'm pretty sure he's the editor-in-chief. Yeah. So if you look on page 15, Roman numeral 15, let's see the other people. Some of them are people that we know very well, like Jan Urbach.
Jan Urbach
is one of the, so if you, even before the introduction page is where the list of the people. Len Gordon, Stuart Kelman, Alan Lutovsky, Joe Lee. So the people I know on this list, Larry Siebert, some of you know, I think he's at Town and Village.
Yes.
Is he Town and Village?
Yes.
And our members, Narda and Shelley are members there also. Jan Urbach is a woman rabbi who's done really fantastic work, super smart, one of the smartest rabbis out there. Whenever I can,
she played a big role in all of those really wonderful readings by women poets.
There you go. Reuven, who is a conservative rabbi. You talk about these people and about the poets in this. And Reuven, who
No, I just know Jan felt really good about the work on this. Rabbi Orbach felt very good about the work on this and her contribution to bringing in a lot of these female writers.
Which, you know, which has been an issue in the conservative movement.
And also the language and also the inclusive language is a lot to do with her as well.
Yeah. She's one of the smartest rabbis I know. I mean, anytime I can find a sermon of hers, I always learn from her. Don't you think, Reuven? She's really.
Oh, yeah.
She's a serious scholar and a fantastic. So it doesn't mean we love everything about this Moxor. We're not advocating CBST to become a conservative synagogue. But because of people like Jan Urbach, it is not the right-wing conservatism of my childhood. You know, I grew up in a right-wing conservative synagogue that was so boring. I mean, it didn't really matter about ideology. It was just the most boring, the dullest, you know. You know, I think some of you know the story that we had a rabbi, the only participation we were allowed as kids was to pick the melody for Adon Olam. Some of you have heard this story. So of course, you know, it was the 60s. And so one week we sang it to Jesus Christ Superstar just to really upset the rabbi. You know, like that was the idea of our rebellion. It was, yeah. So this is not, this book is not that conservative movement. And it really reflects a very progressive, lots that it's taken out male gendered language. Somebody asked in there, well, what about LGBTQ stuff? The Reconstructionist Moxor doesn't have LGBTQ stuff in it. We bring the LGBTQ stuff. Everybody says to me that we should do our own Moxor. Here's what I say to that. Okay, Marcia and Susan and I, we did a Friday night Siddur. It took us 10 years to do the Friday night Siddur. Imagine doing that. But yes, so I'm happy to use somebody else's Moxor. Believe me, we will LGBTQI it. You know, but the Reconstructionist Moxor isn't LGBTQ. I would say that in Yizkor, by the way, it does use the word partner as one of the options for saying Yizkor, which is very progressive. It has husband, wife, partner. So that's progressive. So it's not offensive, but no, it doesn't, it's not a queer Moxor. We will make it queer, I promise. We are queer, right? Some of us are, or all of us, no matter what.
And
so
I went to a talk, Rabbi Urbach actually gave a lecture earlier this month for Elul, and she answered that question, what if the words in the Moxor or Siddur are not exactly the words I want to pray? She said, you have my permission to pray the words in your heart if you want, when it comes to Meitim and Kol Hai and things like that. Would you agree, Rabbi?
Absolutely, with everything. That's the power of it. So folks, we're at time. But what I'd love is for, if you do own this, to between this today and next Monday night, read through it, really spend some time, look at those different columns, use some Post-it notes or a pencil or whatever it is, mark some things up. This, like everything we're doing at COVID, it's not perfect, but none of us are perfect. No Moxor is perfect.
Rabbi, that was a question actually that someone asked early. What is the custom about marking up a Siddur or Moxor with a pencil or pen or sticky notes?
I use a pencil. I think it's perfectly, personally, I think it's perfectly fine. It helps this for, if I want to have a note for myself. I also use a lot of these little sticky notes that so look through it, use little sticky notes, whatever works for you. It's a holy book for sure. Don't put it on the floor. Don't let it go down on the floor. But I don't think there's, personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with using a pencil to make notes for yourself that are respectful, that are about making the book work for you as a prayer book.
So next Monday, same bat time, same bat channel, but you will be taking us forward from here. It is not a repeat of this session.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, we're going to start to look at other prayers. But tonight was really about getting to know a little bit about how to use this Moxor. What is the layout? What do the editors mean by the layout? And we'll continue looking at some specific prayers. The major weakness of this Moxor is that there is no index. So if you want to find something, it's a lot harder. You can't just look up in the back the way the reconstructionist Moxor. And I think it's its primary weakness. So but it means you have to flip through, you have to use the bottom, those footers, is that what it's called? Footnotes, footers? To find the particular part of the service and to look for things. If you're looking for a particular, like you want to find Avinu Malkeinu, you have to work a little harder. You can't just look up Avinu Malkeinu.
It's a running foot or a running head?
What are they called?
Running feet.
Running feet?
Heads.
Okay.
And they usually in a normal book, not a religious book like this, where it's repeating from side to side, it would have the chapter and then the section.
Uh-huh.
It would be, but this is great.
This is Hebrew English on the same, but of the same thing.
It's great, but you know where you are.
You know where you are. It starts with the day, which service, and then what part of the service.
Yeah.
I think that's terrific. I just wish it had an index.
If Jesse is here, we had several questions. Do people need to register again for the second session? Can they use this sign-on, or will there be a new email sent out with the new sign-up, but you don't have to register again? Jesse, are you with us?
Yes, you do not have to register again. Anyone who's on this call right now does not have to register again, because it's, same thing.
Okay. And I believe this session is being recorded too, so we could make it available for people to learn. Yeah.
It is.
All right, thank you everybody. Wonderful to be with you. And those in the Psalms class, you see you bright and early tomorrow morning, and those in Rabbi Moskowitz's class even earlier.
Even earlier.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.